All right. So the if you are already if you are a student who already learned SQL language from your past experience, then chapter two may not is not really that necessary for you to go through the entire chapter, because that basically they just introduce the SQL statement one step at a time, starting from the keyword select from, and then one every new example they will add one new keyword. So, and actually I have a typing error here. I should have a space here. So say for example in this particular SQL statement that you have from and there is a order by keyword be entered. Now in this lecture I will not go in there and type, and that will be kind of wasting too much time in the recording. But you can the recommendation is if you are new that try to type this each one of this query into the engine that we just saw, either in Microsoft or Oracle, and before you execute the query, try to anticipate what the result will look like, and then execute to see if the results show up as what you anticipated. Right, so that's what I would recommend as probably the best way to learn if you are new. But if you are an experienced user, you can go directly into Module 1B. Module 1B, of course, I try to capture some important point about the SQL select statement, especially those places you tends to make mistake or tends to create problem when you are learning. Now, this particular statement you see on the screen here does create a couple of places that might come up with problem. One is that in this particular statement we have where statement now, and the where statement is not a simple where statement, and where statement usually contains some sort of a conditional statement. So in this case, I say department had to be water sports department, right? So and now we have involved a single quote in the query. And this is replying to, I believe, Irman, you mentioned, right, that this is case sensitive. So water sports is case sensitive in this case. But the rest of the query, other than Nancy Myers and water sports, these two phrases are case sensitive. The rest of them are not, right? And the space are not relevant. So you have one space, two space, no space, they all work. But of course, you need to have a space to separate keywords. So you cannot leave this space out like this one. But you have one space or two space. That's pretty much the same. So this gives you some practice on slice and dice both already. So this is pretty much a standard way of writing query. And knowing this, you pretty much already learn the basic Excel skill or the spreadsheet skill to filter. So when you build a filter in your spreadsheet, you are pretty much doing this, right? You're doing the select and where statement. So that is this one. And the other important features of well, important not feature, important importance of this particular tutorial is, and because the textbook is written in Microsoft SQL Server environment, and when we focus our learning in the Oracle environment, actually both, when we try to expose ourselves in both, you will be encounter the complexity of there are minor discrepancy between the SQL language in SQL Server and Oracle. Or if we bring in another one, say MySQL or DB2, you'll create more differences, right? And earlier in the slide, I went through very quickly. I talked about the not I didn't talk about it, but the textbook tell you about the history. And in general, the SQL standard go through SQL 92, SQL 77, 82, 92, 99, and 2005, I believe. And each generation they try to make the language more standard. But the consensus I've seen in most of the programming world is that we try to stick with SQL 92. So that will be the standard we use. But even with SQL 92, Oracle and Microsoft are different. So that part I want to put some differences in the tutorial slide that I generated. And without explaining each one of the SQL individually, I'll kind of go through them very quickly. So this one, instead of using a conditional statement, we have a new keyword called in. In is a set concept. You try to create a set. In this case, we have three names from the buyer. So you can write this alternatively using buyer equal to Nancy Meyer or Cindy Lower or Jerry Martin. Instead of writing three or statement, you can use one in and create a set. So this is just an alternative way of writing the condition that we try to generate a query. And similarly, we can use not in to exclude the set you want to filter in this particular example. You can also have, if this is a numerical column or numerical data, you can use a number, say a range, 100 to 200, and you get between and statement. And in the real work environment, once you have write a lot of SQL language, this becomes natural. But if this is kind of like an occasional job you need to do as IT professional, don't worry. Then all these statements you can use the like I said the Apex environment they have quick SQL, and in the SQL environment they have something called the Smart SQL if I remember correctly, and both of them are very smart tools that give you more like a Tableau type of interface for you to build query. And we will experience that in probably week number 8 or 9 when we have another tutorial building application that will show that part of the feature to you. But to start learning, I want to get into more detailed structure of the language, so I do not teach you how to write the SQL in a shortcut way first. So that's the thing. So in this particular slide, you will see that there are explanation about the difference between Microsoft Access and Microsoft SQL Server. So wildcard use is you want to replace a string with some sort of a single space or single character or multiple character, and there are differences. And I put this slide here because I know some of you have learned Microsoft Access and write query in Microsoft Access. They are slightly different when you write in SQL environment. So this example shows you how the wildcard is used in this case not in two places. One is wildcard used in the column name. So the first wildcard is the asterisk. The asterisk is represent everything. So you have this very top. You have this asterisk represent all the columns. So this in this example, you select all the column from the SKU data. And the second example, the wildcard is we use a percentile to represent a string of any length. So you have a string of any length in front of number 2, and you have a string of 2 space after number 2. So that's the string we are trying to look at. So basically, we are looking at a SKU number that is the last 3 digit is in the 200. So we are looking for the 200. Doesn't matter what's before, how many thousand or tens of thousand, or how many tens or single, but we're looking at 200 something and in the entire set of our SKUs. So that's what we are looking for. And so this is traditionally we call them, it's no longer, it's more like a partial and partial matching in our query terminology. We're trying to match partially when we try to filter. So instead of filter the entire thing, that we can filter partially, and combined with some of the useful SQL function, very similar to the Excel function. You can do uppercase, lowercase conversion, number to string, string to number, number to currency, all these type of conversion, and do different type of filter and search in the process of issue query. Right, so that's the first discrepancy in terms of the SQL standard. Unfortunately, that's the reality. We all hope that, and actually, the SQL 92 standard, when it was issued, the hope was every company adopt the same standard, and so the database doesn't matter created by which company can operate interchangeably. But unfortunately, every company still try to control their territory and inject a lot of their own statements here. So this is another statement that when you are writing in the two different environment. In SQL Server environment, this is called the concatenation operation, right? So it represented by a plus sign. It's basically connecting string together, partial string together. So you can build a sentence or build some sort of output. And in a typical application environment, one of the application here you will see is, say, for example, when you try to send out a mass email. So when you try to send out a mass email, we all know that when you receive some sort of a promotional material from any company, you will see a standard email, but the customer name will be replaced by your name, right? So each person will receive a standard email, but only the name be replaced. And the same feature you can see in Microsoft Word when you try to use the mail feature, send out email feature from Word within the Word and come out with Excel. And similar operation can be done in query, and this is actually you can construct the or format the output input or output differently based on on how you use this operator. So in Microsoft system is represented by a plus sign, but in the Oracle system it's actually represent or actually represent by where is that? Here, represented by a double line operator. So, and I copy a screen the keyboard to show you where the double line is. You use the shift to create this and type it twice. So instead of using plus, you have to use a double straight line to represent the concept called concatenation. Right. So that's the thing. And after that, you have the textbook show you how to use some SQL function. SQL function are as powerful as a spreadsheet function. So whatever you find that you yourself want to use some spreadsheet function, you can use it, except for the if then else. Most of the spreadsheet function you want to do, including statistic feature, standard deviations, find out regression, you can do them in the SQL building function. And a lot of these conversions are done in SQL function as well. So the way you put in SQL function is like a regular function, and you put them into your SQL statement. And the function will return certain value, and the value will be combined into your SQL statement and construct the SQL language and deliver the result. Right? So that's something you want to try step by step and test. And when we put a function inside a column, and there are certain things that you can do. In this case, we are counting how many occurrence for a particular group. This is another word, well actually even for some of the people at SQL language training, this may create their first learning hurdle in learning SQL language. That is something what we call the group operation or group by operation. Some of the summation function, right? So these are called the summation function. Summation, you count them, you sum them up together, you sum them up and average them together. You take a group, find out the minimum, and in statistics we call them descriptive statistic. And these operations, when it is used in SQL language, have to be used together with group by. Group by, when used properly, and this detail I will show you in the next few tutorial slides. You will see tomorrow when I release that to you in module number 2. And group by is very much like use multiple group by. You can create a analysis very similar to the pivot chart or pivot chart in spreadsheet. So you can filter, you can do the summation, you can do all the calculation by the columns or by the row using group by. And group by in this case, in this example, is do the calculation based on the group of column. So we are grouping by department and buyer. It's not necessarily two, but when we have two of those in here, then you will have two here in the select statement. I'm not saying that by accident. One of the key, I hope this is something that you remember after today's lecture, is that whenever we see a summation function showing up in your select statement, and one of the key to make this statement syntax free meaning that there is no error message, is that other than the summation function, the rest of the column need to show up in group by. So let me explain or elaborate this a little further. This particular statement has one summation function select as one column and two columns selected. All three, the result should have three columns. So looking at the select, we have select one column, two column, three columns. So this is the third column. So the third column is a count, is a summation. So this result should, as anticipated, see the table below, now we have three columns being selected. But since we have a summation function here, the group by statement is a must. So the group by need to present the column other than the summation. So in this case, we have summation function as count. The other two will be department and buyer. Both of them need to be in here. If you delete buyer, say I only want to see the sum of department total, it will give you error message, right? Because summation function, two column, you have only one column in group by. So that is a very common mistake for new student try to learn group by statement. Everything you see other than the summation need to show up in the group by. Can you put buyer in front in department in the second plate? The answer is yes, you can do that. And when you do this, the grouping change, right? You can try to experience to see why a grouping change. It's kind of like a decision tree. When you switch the decision tree one layer to another, the grouping will change a little bit, right? So in this case, we group department first and then group buyer. Earlier we group buyer first before we group department, which will generate slightly different result. Right, so this is the original query. You can switch these two, but both of them need to exist in the group by statement. Right. So that is actually the most important among everything we learn in chapter 2. Tends to confuse you, and this is probably the most confusing statement, other than the nested subquery. Right. And finally, we have this last keywords, and I usually refrain myself using a having statement. The having statement is after you have group by, then you can use having to further limit the result of the group you want to show. So it's kind of a double filter in a way. And sometimes it depends on how good is your programming logic. If your programming logic is good, then you will have no problem using this. But if you have trouble in the past learning programming language, using having, you're actually creating one extra layer of the looping in the statement. So that's something. But it's a result after you generate a group result. You further limited how many groups you want to show in the statement. So this is an example that we want to make sure that we only show the department has more than one count in terms of the stock keeping unit. By the way, stock keeping unit is, or SKU, is an inventory control jargon talking about the system. Right, so somebody is trying to call me. Hold on a second. Let me kind of answer the call. Sorry for the interruption. That if this is on-campus class, this will be very embarrassing as a professor. And we ask students do not turn on the phone, and my phone is actually on myself. But anyway, so that's this is an example of using having. So the logic is once we create a group, and I want to make sure that the group is limited further by my condition. In this case, I count by department how many stock keeping unit each department has. And once we have the count, I want to make sure that I want to exclude the department does not have has any inventory. Stock keeping unit is the jargon used for inventory. Stock keeping unit, and it's not stock keeping unit can be a single object, can be a dozen, can be a pallet, can be a box. Depends on what is the unit that you are trying to count of the inventory. So, but anyway, so that's the nature of the query. So this is a pretty comprehensive query already. We have select statement, we have where statement, we have a group by statement, we have a heading statement. We also have some order statement here to kind of sort the result into an orderly format fashion. Right? So that's the learning of the query. And multiple query for this particular chapter, I'll leave for you to sort of like read first. And also in the chapter 2, especially at the end of this chapter, going to part 2, if you go to the slide of the textbook, this is you find that chapter 2 has 2 PowerPoint slides. This is a pretty long chapter, reviewing select statement. Usually this will become a 1 month, 4 weeks of learning material in a typical sort of like undergraduate learning class, but we kind of condense them into 1 week in 1 chapter and try to deliver to you. So it's a pretty long chapter, and it contains everything you need to know about query. So the multi-table and subquery are grouped into part 2, and what you're seeing on the screen here is query the single table. That's in part 1. And for querying of the subquery and multiple table, and those will also have corresponding tutorial that I designed as part of your assignment in module number 2. So we'll see those very quickly next week. And so this, starting from probably as early as this Monday, or officially next Monday, you should be in full gears in chapter 2, and try to complete chapter 2 as quick as you can to grab some of the basic of a query. You will still make mistake when you are writing query, especially if you are new, after you complete chapter 2, but it's reasonable training to prepare you to become a database professional. So that's what I intend to do in this particular lecture here. And I'll stop the recording here. Before I stop, I want to ask any question about the thing I mentioned in module 1B tutorial, which sort of like combine the 2 part of the chapter 2 slides into 1 and point out the difference and important kind of a language structure problem that you might encounter. Put them into the slides here. So if not, very quickly I'll stop the recording at this particular point in time for the second recording of our lecture today.